Today we have to state awareness to and analysis of anti-Semitism within the scientific world, in the better part of the political establishment, as well as amongst public opinion leaders. In November 2008, in memory of the November pogrom 1938, the German parliament adopted a resolution against anti-Semitism, which focuses on a support of Jewish life in Germany and an intensive work on pedagogical measures against anti-Semitic tendencies. The parliamentarians agreed upon the implementation of an expert body, where I am a member of, to organize and to supervise this initiative. Based on the so-called working definition of anti-Semitism of the Human Dimension Department of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and the European Fundamental Rights Organization, as well as Dina Porat from Tel Aviv University, one of the main tasks of this expert body on anti-Semitism will be to raise awareness also on subtle forms of anti-Semitism, often not recognized as such. There it becomes obvious that for a greater part in German society, the borderline between legitimate criticism and the criticism of Israel or Israeli politics and the use of anti-Semitic stereotypes is not clear enough. They are not aware that it's not anymore the Jew who is targeted, but the state of Israel, instead by using the same old and traditional stereotypes known from the long history of anti-Semitism. Since the Second Intifada, the tradition of demonizing Jews has been transferred to the State of Israel. The French philosopher Pierre-André Taguieff calls this nouvelle Judeophobie planétaire, new planetary Judeophobia, the idea that all the world's problems are due to the existence of Israel. This new Judeophobia, which we in our Center for Research on Anti-Semitism are not convinced that it's a new anti-Semitism, because it's always the same. It's always the same stereotypes, always the same patterns, but other scientists are talking about the new anti-Semitism. This was initiated by radical Islamic activists, by the hires of Third Worldism, and by far-left anti-globalization activists. Such groups accuse the Jews of being themselves racist. Thus, according to Taguieff, there seems to be an anti-Jewish anti-racism. In this way, traditional anti-Semitism has metamorphosed into a more respectable form, and it is positioned to make its way into the political mainstream. Criticism of Israeli politics from this perspective invokes a double standard in which Israel is evaluated differently to other states. False historical parallels are drawn, equating with the National Socialists, and anti-Semitic myths and stereotypes are used to characterize Israel or Israelis. Israeli policies towards the Palestinians for those holding such views provide reason to denounce Jews generally as perpetrators, thereby calling into question the moral status as victims that they had assumed as a consequence of the Holocaust. The connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, anti-Zionist sentiments, as we call it, not as an inner Jewish discussion, but this crossing a borderline of legitimate criticism to using anti-Semitic stereotypes. These sentiments, the connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist sentiments lies in this opportunity of a revival of the perpetrator-victim role and of a platform which is easy to be used to express traditional anti-Semitic stereotypes against Israel, evading the ague of being anti-Semite or even express, prosecute relevant issues. This also influences the public discourse on the Holocaust, and after all, educational tools in the area of Holocaust education. In recent years, there's a boom of Holocaust and National Socialist related German documentary films, movies and docu-soaps. The attention they got and the media reaction giving the impression that these films finally explain the Holocaust and National Socialism left historians a little bit perplexed. Some of the films and the following media coverage suggested that those films and documentaries showed new, never researched parts of the history, or that they would transmit the historical truths, which is not the case. People were attracted by the stories and stormed into the cinemas. The same occurred with some TV transmissions, which had a high percentage of viewers. Hundreds of books, endless historical researches, and exhibitions on the Holocaust and the National Socialist period obviously have had no greater influence. But one-sided books, as the one by Daniel Goldhagen, or films, had and still have an enormous impact in public. But all this is not only negative. Such events also push debates and lead to new perspectives the public would never gain from research books. Nevertheless, generally spoken, it has to be clear that knowledge about the Holocaust does not prevent holding anti-Semitic stereotypes. So blaming Jews for dominating public discourse with Holocaust-related issues does not only serve as a tool to prevent debating German responsibility, but it also serves as a platform to transport old anti-Semitic stereotypes. Surveys of the Anti-Defamation League in the last years showed that 45% of the Germans believe that, I quote, Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust. Similar percentages are seen in other countries, in France, in Austria. This shows that with the media coverage of the theme, there's not triggered just a feeling of satiation, but it gives also the wrong impression that Jews were constantly talking about their faith. The high level of agreement is also an expression of a defense against dealing with the past, and the depth right up to the Jews who are declared responsible, that the awaited final line, as we call it in German, Schlussstrich, under the past cannot be made. Such appreciations also play a role in current discourses about the Holocaust in Germany, but also in other Eastern and Middle European countries dealing with their double historical past, the Nazi period and the Stalinist era. Historians compare these two dictatorships for evaluating equal patterns and after all specify the differences. The political scientist Klaus Leggevi once formulated, I quote, "The difficulty of the European culture of memory is to point on the singularity of the breaking of civilization by the industrially and bureaucratically organized destruction of the European Jews without dogmatically avoid the historical comparison with the systematic extermination of class and people enemies in the Soviet sphere." End of quote. In public debates about both dictatorships, there is a tendency to leave the level of scientific approach and equate both dictatorial systems. This opens the ground for a trivialization of the Holocaust, what might cause also a challenge to memorial sites, which have to cover both historical periods, as we have them in Germany, a few of them. As trivialization is the strategy of the far-right circles in Germany to evade criminal persecution based on the law against Holocaust denial, this might soften the borders between extreme positions and the mainstream. Parallel with the beginning of the Second Intifada in 2000, anti-Semitism in Europe reached a turning point. After 1945, the history shows that anti-Semitic attacks have mostly targeted Jewish memorials and symbols, and the main proponents of classical anti-Semitism, which emerges basically from problems of coming to terms with the Nazi past, were found in the extreme right wing and up to the conservative camps. The most recent anti-Semitism emerging from the Middle East conflict has also a left-wing provenance. For Europe, and especially for Germany, the Finnish social psychologist Kamila Liebkin summarizes this phenomenon most accurately. I quote, "Israel serves as a catalyst and projecting screen for resentment, which has its proper source in European feelings of guilt and in the traditional anti-Semitism of Western culture." End of quote. In Germany, this is not a new development. Anti-Semitism, sometimes connected to anti-American feelings, is obvious since the 1970s and the Yom Kippur War. The Middle East conflict has reinforced the traditional link between anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, a strain of hatred that became particularly virulent with the portrayal of the United States as Israel's protector and as the driving force behind the Iraq War and the war on terrorism.